ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Impossible World Podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a bit of time. Also, there was a week there where I didn't upload one. Forgive me, it's just like editing and timing and upload schedule and all these things. But we just made let's talk about that, and we're no longer have to worry about that. Again, we're no longer doing, we're aiming for daily uploads, but if there's a day where there's no uploads, then hopefully you guys will realize that I was trying to make something, or I had something come up in my life, and we're just trying to make fun, good content that I would enjoy making, and would enjoy making 50 of those videos because I enjoy it that much. Yes. Regardless, that also applies to this series. The last part required me, at least my standard for what I wanted that podcast to be, was very, I wanted to do right by this idea that I had, which is the idea of Act 2, and how like setting up another act, another like jumping board, is super important. And how difficult that is. Also, I realized how weird the premise of this show is, because it is very much like a episodic, like you need to watch episode 1 before you watch episode 2. Not ideal for podcast things. Again, maybe in the future we'll make another podcast where it's just us talking about world events and goofing around. For right now, it is definitely the story one, because I love storytelling so much. And also, I just want to give you guys, again, a place where you can bounce off of and build characters in this world and think of crazy things. So again, to recap last part, which was very convoluted and quite complicated, although I tried to do my best to make it less so. So again, Act 1, the idea is on Halloween night, this demigod appears and basically turns every single person that was in their costumes into monsters. I thought this was a cool premise. I seen it first in Halloween Town. I thought, what would that be in a larger story and a larger scale? But also, I have an undying love for monster movies, especially when it's not just a really one-dimensional monster movie where the monster is perceived as just some berserker monster who has no soul, no character, no being, etc. So I wanted that to reflect in my show, or my movie, TV show. I've talked to you guys before about in the series, but the way we kind of look at things. About like, if I was writing a book, I would say this. If I was filming a TV show, I would make sure the camera's panning around the character when he's at the cemetery and telling his creatures to go hunt. We also added some ground rules, of course. One of them is that if you dressed up as like a really strong ass monster, which you added all these extra prefixes onto it, like god, werewolf, this, that, your body wouldn't be able to handle the mutation, and you might just croak, you might just die. Maybe we don't want to live in a world where it's just like a shit ton of people who are silly die. So maybe it just doesn't work in general. You just revert to normal. And you experience that great pain of like mutating, and then you don't actually get to have any of the benefits that you actually mutated in. But there are some people who actually, let's say, can push through this mutation and actually attain 2 monster kind of ability forms, whatever. So, of course, our main character is half necromancer kind of lich thing. He's a lich king, as well as half a werewolf, because I just thought werewolves, in my opinion, have so much things I don't like in monster movies that they're portrayed as. It seems like they're always second to vampires and every other being, and also they're just ballistic, mad, crazy nonsense where there's no like possibility for self-control, you know, which I think, like, with anything, you could work towards getting a handle on your emotions, you know, and that shit. So I think that's something we could play with in the future, which I definitely want to do. But he also runs into the second main character, kinda, which is Crowley, which is one of the things when I was first making the story is I really wanted to create a friendship system. Like, I never really thought so much about, like, well, what would be a good friendship, and what would, like, be moments when it would bring you together, and it would make you realize the power in each other when you are together. You know, like, when you ride together, you're unstoppable kind of thing. When you lean on each other, nothing can topple you kind of idea. Like, that solid friendship idea. So that was the whole point of like the first act, more or less, and a little bit of the second act. But anyways, so that's the premise of the Act 1. So basically, it's our main characters trying to figure out what the hell they're doing, going throughout the world, understanding these new things and abilities that they can do, as well as getting these pieces of themselves that can help give them a greater advantage within their new circumstance. And then we have to set up another jumping board, or else it's going to become a post-apocalyptic world, which I don't want in this case. Or if I do, I want it to be structured in some sense. I want it to be a world transformation kind of event. So, of course, Act 2 is basically this demigod who flipped a switch and who loves monsters and is pissed off at all human beings for making fun of them and laughing at their difference and all these things. he sees both Grimm and Crowley making their way through Hell Knight and doing all of these kind of tremendous feats. Or not to say that not like it wasn't like other people weren't getting a shit ton of relics, but no one was doing it in the way that they were doing it. About not like no one was bloodthirsty, no one was trying to, they weren't fighting and like evilly to try to attain the thing that they were doing. They were basically just hanging out, trying to understand themselves and going through this encounter. And leaning on each other in a really interesting way, in the same way that monsters lean on each other to survive. And of course he sees that and he thinks, okay, well, I want to talk to these two. So of course Demigod explains his plan to both of them in the way that I dictated last time. But anyways, essentially this ends up with the Demigod realizing that he made a mistake, that he was quite hypocritical in his judgment for human beings, because he was just as judgmental to human beings as human beings were to monsters and things that they didn't understand. After meeting a human who has just as much love for monsters as he does, he starts to take stock of, okay, and to me it was funny because I was trying to see this from a perception of, okay, well, what would this look like if this was actually the case? If you made a choice based on a perception, and you had your world turned upside down, and you basically had to face the choice that you made. So then, to me, I put myself in that kind of situation, and to me, I would try to make the best of the situation that I could, trying to make things right, even though I know I couldn't take things back, So, to me, this creates a very, very cool scaffolding, especially considering this is what I always wanted the story to be. And by the way, I mentioned this, I think at some point, but I thought of every single thing that we talked about in I think 3 days. But with being fair, I also didn't think of the incredible detail in each thing. I just knew I wanted Crowley to basically be a craftsman. I found that out. I knew that I wanted him to get a relic that basically made it easier for him. I knew I wanted Grimm to have this certain kind of combat ability because I wanted to play with that in the future. I knew that there was going to be this demigod that turned everyone into monsters, and then that he would eventually change the world so that it could become more gamified, in a sense. So essentially, that is the way that the demigod or whatever has extended the olive branch to humanity to a certain extent, which is essentially he has summoned forth in the world a bunch of these new dungeons, places that hold treasures, which are to some extent maybe infinite. We'll mess with that idea, but basically he summoned all of these kind of tombs, dungeons, mountains filled to the brim with treasure. But also with enemies and beings that you would need to beat in order to attain said things. Now, why does he think this, or why does he add that caveat? Because he talks to Grimm, and Grimm explains, the demigod explains to him that his favorite thing about monsters is that they accept what they are without question, and they move forward with what they are. But also, they fight for the right to live. That's his favorite thing. This, especially if I was writing a book, I'd have him go on about how he glorifies this idea of every human being and every being in existence wants to survive, wants to live to some tiny amount. And when you are pushed against the brink, you either have a couple emotions, but one of the ones he treasures most is the idea of, I want to live, not only that I want to live, but how dare you try to beat me? How dare you try to hurt me? Almost as like it's not just about survival. It's about hurting, like stopping the thing that would hurt you, not just about running away from it. So he really likes that mentality, and of course fosters that within the game. So basically, there's a bunch of places that hold relics, treasures, the things we've been talking about this whole time, as well as they have monsters. And every time you beat a monster, there's a chance for them to drop, guess what? A currency. Now that currency basically can help you find the other thing that he also summoned, which is a bunch of these, I don't know what to call them. This is where I kind of get a little bit weird, but it's like the dimensional market. It's these old ass wagon tavern looking things that have been placed around the world. It's just these kind of shops that are sprinkled around the world, probably having different looks based on the location that they are at. Regardless, this is a place where you can attain a vast variety of things, and we'll get into this maybe more when we're continuing our story. But basically, this is like if you're a vampire who needs blood, this is a way to get blood without having to drain a human being or whatever, right? If you're a werewolf, this is a way to get a substance that would sate your animal, and again, I don't want to go into the how this is possible, but to me, if I were to go into my head and go into this a little bit more, the reason why this is possible is because if these are some sort of weird dimensional vendors, I guess. There could be a dimension or a place that has like human beings that whenever they breathe, they spew out blood or something, right? But they learn how to coexist and exist in that thing. So you just take a giant bucket of human blood from that dimension and bring it to this, and you're good to go, right? Like a resource in one place may be overabundant in another, but super rare in this one, right? So that's kind of the weirdo environment that we're kind of playing in. But I don't want to go into that because that kind of opens us up to weird space, dimensional, multi-universe kind of thing, which I don't want to do. Let's just say they have some weird access to a slew of trinkets and things, maybe courtesy of the demigod, who knows. But regardless, last we left off is with our main character Grimm getting a new phone, and then them going to the roof because there was an earthquake, and them hearing basically what they did. Now, I didn't really mention this, but they have no memory of the dream sequence meeting the demigod. Grimm, I would like to think, has a tiny bit of an understanding of what happened, like some sort of connection when he sees the demigod's face, like, I think I've seen you before kind of thing. But as of like them knowing what they did, they have no idea. And I also wanted to include, like whilst the demigod is giving his speech, he says, I met a special somebody who changed my mind. And for Grimm to kind of have like this kind of flash in his memory about some sort of thing. So he's like, okay, like there's some sort of understanding where like, okay, maybe I knew this guy. Is he talking to me? That kind of fun understanding. Whereas an audience we know, but for him, he kind of suspects something, but doesn't know. Ladies and gentlemen, stay hydrated. Oh, mother of God. Okay. So again, last we left off, our characters were at the top of a rooftop, overlooking their kind of small city, town, whatever, seeing this giant mountain rumble and shake, and then a bunch of mist start spewing all over that mountain. But then also to see basically this giant, I don't know, for me what I see is kind of like a catacomb mixed with the Roman Colosseum. So this giant Roman circular thing pops up. Oh, by the way, again, I want to stress this. When I thought of this just like throughout me being like, okay, well, I wanted a place for our characters to fight, grow, and then most importantly, to encounter other characters. So this is Act 2, by the way. I should explain that before we jump into the story again. To me, Act 2 is our main characters going into these dungeons, and then also for there to be like a light, very, very light time skip, like maybe 3 weeks time skip, and I'll squeeze in Grimm handling his werewolf in that time as to leave some sort of mystery, because I think that'd be fun in terms of storytelling. But regardless, everyone is bleeding into these dungeons, these tombs, to try to understand not only what they can do, not only to maybe attain treasure, relics, or just to get enough currency to where they can sate whatever monster part of them is. And then some people have a different outlook, by the way. I would like to mess around with the idea of like human beings find ecosystem and harmony within this chaos. So maybe some people are like, I don't want to run into danger in order to be able to exist. I want to go do my job, and I'll pay you human currency, dollars, for this currency, and I'll just buy through that. Boom, boom. And there could be various like good guilds that pop up as well that like are like, hey, 90% of all of the stuff that we make are tied to just feeding like children who need this currency to buy the supplies to help them live without hurting other people, right? So again, I would like to think that's like, this is how guilds could pop up. This is how certain people could form things. The government could regulate some stuff, you know. So to me, again, I don't want it just be like, and we're in a post-apocalypse. I want it to be like the world stabilizes in chaos, and we're pushed into an age that is very, very strange, very much similar to adventuring and other kind of shows and books. Regardless, the other thing that I was talking about, but then I got caught up. Dimache, or Is It Wrong to Pick Girls in a Dungeon, has a kind of a similar beat a little bit in terms of there being this tomb that has monsters. You go deeper and deeper, and you get more and more monsters. And the deeper you go, the harder the monster. I don't like. First of all, that. This could I love that TV series, so this could be subliminal, but when I was thinking about it, I didn't think about it. I told you guys, I modeled Crowley really, really close to Good Omens, which I love greatly. You should watch the show. It's fantastic regardless. I want our tombs to kind of work a tiny bit differently. I think in Dimache they have it like 1 to 100, where to me I think it would be nice if it was like 1 to 50. Actually, yeah, I'd rather do it that way. Yeah, let's say there's no more than like 30 floors, but each floor is giant. It's like a huge ecosystem. Like again, we're messing around with like this weird dimensional shit. Let's say you enter into this Colosseum that's no bigger than the Roman Colosseum, but it's like a weird thing. You go down and you're like in this giant scape, like almost like an underground forest beneath this place, just giant. With tons of these enclaves, mountains, just huge. It's almost like a teleporting to another world, but it does have a circular dome containing it. It's kind of like the Harry Potter effect, where you go into like a tent and it's like a giant house, you know? But to me, that's kind of what I would want it to be. Whereas in Dimache, it's very much like level 1 is just a bunch of these weird cave caverns, which I don't want. I want it to be like this giant dome, this giant place. Also, I want it to be, since we're in the beginner stages of it, we may never get to the final floor in this thing. You know, we may, if I ever wanted to get crazy, we could do like a time skip, generational wise, and then maybe that's when they do it. But regardless, we're getting a little ahead of ourselves. That's some explanation of what the hell's going on with these tombs, what's going on with these vendors, and then lastly, what the hell is the point of Act 2? I kind of touched on this, I think, but basically Act 2 for me, because Act 1 was basically them getting their relics, getting their powers, Act 2 is characters. Specifically, building a group, or building a... not a guild, maybe a guild, I don't know what you'd call it, but basically there's so many ideas that I have when it comes to monsters that I love to pieces. Like for instance, to tell you about probably the 2 that we'll do next, one that I love to pieces is the Oni, and I love the idea of a sealed Oni and how that can be portrayed. And the idea I have is this dude who's a sealed Oni, and I think it could be really fucking cool, especially after having watched Slime Rancher, or not Slime Rancher, is it reincarnated as a slime? They have really cool Onis in there. I think they call them orcs, but I always know it as an Oni. It's like something with a horn, basically. Regardless, they have like insane strength, and I think you could do a lot of cool storytelling with that like strength parameter. Regardless, the other one that I love immensely, as of like a character idea, is the idea of a person who their armor is alive, and their armor is almost everything that they are, and messing with that. And I've already created like a lore and a story about the thing I'm trying to talk about, but basically that's what it is. It's taking like character ideas and building upon them. Like for instance, one of the things I think would be really cool too is with these 2 characters that we have, Grim being the person that's kind of, I want to be anchored to these other characters, and Crowley being the kind of thing that's observing and keeping everything on the up and up. Is that this, like for instance, Tinkerbell, that was one of the things I thought. Like if you were able to do like a Tinkerbell arc, where you basically pull in this person from a group and bring them into your tribe almost. Kind of similar to Slime Rancher, or I keep saying Slime Rancher, reincarnated as a slime, similar to that anime to some extent. But regardless, that's the whole premise of Act 2. We're in these tombs. Along our journey, Grim is going to meet people, and he's going to try to help them, and then they're going to basically be assimilated into the tribe, into the group. And hopefully we'll be able to do that in various fun ways. But again, there needs to be kind of like a little time skip just so the world can kind of catch up. But before we do that time skip, I want to introduce the vendors, I want to introduce the tombs, and I want to introduce something else, and that will probably be the place where we're like, then there's a time skip. Then there's some shit. But anyways, again, we're not there yet. So again, Grim and Crowley have just experienced this announcement, and at this point, sure, let's cycle through some time. Let's say Grim and Crowley go back downstairs and they kind of talk about it for a while, and they both are very, very, very intrigued by what's happening. And now I want to point out something as well. Grim and Crowley have no idea about the power scaling that what is them to other people. So him and Crowley both eat, and let's say that him and Crowley both have breakfast, and of course Grim inhales everything that he eats, and eats like 5 times the amount that Crowley eats, and Crowley's just looking at him kind of bewildered, like, oh, okay, well that's a lot of food. Regardless, eventually they're like, all right, we should definitely go check out what this is. Well, you know, we've lived through Hell Night. I can't see this vendor being that much worse. But this does seem like everyone is awake and aware. So let's say 6 or 7 hours. No, that's too much. Let's say 4 hours have passed. They've really thought about it. They've eaten. Let's say they've also spent some time looking through their skills, seeing what they can buy, leveling themselves up. I don't want to go too much into what they've spent leveling up because there's no reason to. We're not going to get combat oriented just yet. So there's no real reason to say what they have new skills or whatnot. So they both eventually, after a couple hours pass, go downstairs, get in Crowley's car, and whew, they start heading their way to what is a marked location. And yeah, sure, let's say that you're even drawn to these stores because they house the very things that your monster is craving. So you can feel that pull, similar to a relic, let's say. Regardless, him and Crowley are driving down the street, and all around them there's some broken cars, there's some buildings that are just untouched. There are smoking vehicles, there are people walking down the streets frantically, seeming worried, there are people hiding behind trash cans, there are also people who are just driving around, same as you and Crowley. So, him and Crowley finally pull up to this kind of, again, to explain what I see when I see this shop, this store, a horse-pulled wagon, except a little bit more bulky without a horse, just kind of sitting there, idle, with this giant, strange-looking person kind of turned around. So you know how there's like, if you go to a food truck, there's like this giant open window? Well, you can see that there's a person there. Well, it's almost like he's facing away from you. So that's what Grim and Crowley see as they pull up and they park. And one of the things that they notice is that they feel like there's a lot of people around. Let's just say, Grim with his weird werewolf sense can just feel that there's a lot of people around, but everyone's hiding. So regardless, him and Crowley both look at each other and say like, are we gonna do this? Yep, we're damn well gonna do this. So they get out of their car and they start walking, and as they're walking to the corner of this street where this cabin is being held, they see behind a trash can this tiny little girl who has like a little bit of blood, let's say, dripping down her mouth. And she seems terrified when she sees you and Crowley pass. She winces and hides deeper behind the trash can. But she was peeking out, looking at the shop. So basically, what I'm getting at is everybody is fucking terrified of this. They're all being drawn to it, but no one wants to be the first one that goes up and does it. But you and Crowley, these motherfuckers who have survived Hell Night, smooth sailing, both have the courage, of course, to walk up and say, what's up? So, of course, you and Crowley make your way up to this wooden wagon. And you are greeted with this giant, it's so weird what I see, but the guy who runs the shop do you guys remember Lilo and Stitch? So you know how there was those two aliens? One was like the one dude with one eye, and he was super weird and like thin, but then there was like this big, looked like a mole rat guy who was like tan black, but he had like mole rat face looking thing, like it was just thick as well, dense. That's what I see. But also the store owner, I want to be very like jovial and like happy and like chuckling and not like monstrous in the slightest. Very welcoming, very cheery. So of course him and Grim and Crowley make their way to the cabin, greeted by this jovial Santa-like weirdo who says, "Oh, you're the first customers I've ever had. This is wonderful. What can I do for you? All these lovely things." And then Grim, of course, being polite, says, "It's nice to see you, or nice to meet you. What kind of monster are you?" And all this stuff. And then they have this quick back and forth. And then Crowley steps up and says an actual question, and says, "Hey, well, what is it that you can offer us?" The message said, or the transmission or whatever said from the demigod said, "Hey, they'll offer you something that can sate your hungers," or something like that. And then the big Santa-like jolly possum-looking thing says, "Oh, have I got things for you. Blood of the highest order, the best meat money can buy, free of charge for a month or two, moon bars, angel tears, and all manner of treats, as well as some weapons, but those you'll have to go into the tomb in order to have enough money to get." And Grim kind of ponders about like, well, wait, what do you mean about like blood or fine meat or whatever? And then the dude basically says, well, every monster has a need. Some are lesser than others are more than others. So for instance, if you happen to be quite silly and write in bloodthirsty or bloodthirsty vampire, well, you're going to need a lot more blood than a normal person. Ergo, you'll need a higher basically potency of blood, which I can offer you, but only for, again, a month. You're gonna have to go to the tomb, get some currency eventually to help pay for this substance. And sure, let's say Grim and Crowley eventually ponder, okay, well, what would we need? Because we don't know a bunch about what we are. Although maybe they do, because they do have that skill tree, which I would like to be like a reflection of their monster. But maybe it's just a skill tree. Maybe it's not like a bestiary about you. Yeah, let's just say that. Let's just say it's not. Let's definitely not say it's a bestiary. It's just a skill tree. So, anyways, the big bad possum beast says, not big bad. He's a very jolly. Like I see him as like a very smooth talking store owner. Well, Grim ponders. Okay, well, what can you do for me? I guess is what I'm trying to know. And then the big possum thing bubbles up and says, "Oh, well, I'm glad you asked," and leans forward and does 2 sniffs in Griff's vicinity and goes, "Ah, werewolf." Oh, and something else. Does the same thing to Crowley and nails on the money. It calls out that he's a demon. By the way, while Crowley was approaching the shop, Crowley's wearing his glasses, basically concealing that he is a demon, basically, as well as he has the ring, which is now hiding his presence, so he has no negative aura going around him. Yeah, let's say that. Let's say that when the big possum beast leans over to get a sense of what Crowley is by sniffing, he has to go like... I do that 4 or 5 times. It's like, oh, a little bit of demon, okay, because that ring is shielding all kind of outer perception or bleed off of what he could be. Regardless, the store owner basically plops down this bar, and it's a moon bar, something that can sate his werewolf. And it's, to me, I don't know, it could be whatever you want. It could have like whatever texture you want. All I know is that Grim takes it, opens it, takes a bite out of it. Yeah, and let's say his eyes like glisten with this orange, like they brightly glow as he starts gnawing into it and then just devours it immediately. And then Crowley kind of steps forward like, okay, well, like, what can you offer me, kind of thing. So then he leans forward and drops forward angel tears, let's say. And it's in this very tiny vial, pops it open, takes a swig of it, and feels himself immediately be filled with like this relaxed, calm, blissful serenity. And both of them are like, okay, that was great. And then the store owner laughs, chuckles, and leans forward and says, I'm sorry about the Lich King, or the Lich part of you, to Grim. Unfortunately, there's nothing I can do for that. The good news is that it already takes something from you, which is your emotions, but you seem to be pretty fine. Like, it's kind of like, huh, weird. And essentially, it's playing off the idea of the Lich King takes basically your emotion, your personality, but there's nothing more emotional than a fucking werewolf who has a ton of like rage and emotion. Also, Grim himself is probably pretty more, just has a good connection with just having emotion, being a jolly person as well. But that also lays a really cool idea that we can mess with, is, again, the necromancer, lich thing, whatever, starts pulling your emotions as fuel, and then the werewolf basically keeps giving you emotion, but that also drains the werewolf. So what this does is this intensifies the werewolf's hunger. So that moon thing is good, but it's still not as good as it can be. And the store owner basically tells both of them more about what they can eat and stuff like that. So basically he goes in to tell Grim that you can substitute this like moon bar with just eating a shit ton of food, but you would need to consume a monstrous amount of calories in order to actually sate it to like the same amount that this tiny moon bar would. But it's entirely possible. And he said, like, you've lucked out on that, only to realize that you need to eat a fuck ton because of the fact that he is a lich. Regardless, he also tells Crowley that these tears are represented of this kind of like emotion that you feed off of. You feed off of fear, terror, worry, things like that. And then Crowley kind of like sits there and ponders that and he's like, okay. And then the monster person also says, well, this is good, these tears, but it's even better if it's fresh. And then Crowley ponders, like, I don't want to make people cry. And then that's when he explains, well, it's not just tears, it's emotion. So when someone experiences stress, when someone experiences fear, adrenaline, things like that, something that would be a somewhat, not entirely, but somewhat a negative emotion, you can pull that and you gain strength from that. And that basically keeps you fresh. Otherwise, you'll start getting more, and you'll start projecting more and more demon aura until, which, by the way, that's kind of I should explain Crowley a little bit when it comes to his kind of power scaling, rating, and all that stuff. But basically, what I'm kind of messing around with Crowley right now is when Grim goes hungry, he starts becoming more and more werewolf and monstrous, and it becomes harder to control his werewolf. That's kind of obvious. But Crowley, he's a demon. So the thing I'm messing around with right now is the fact that Crowley he feeds off of negative-ish emotions. And when he doesn't do that, basically there is like a monstrous countermeasure with that. So what is that countermeasure? Well, basically, if you go a long time without, and taking your basically your need, your thing, your monster nature, fuel, whatever it is, he'll start projecting more and more of this demon aura, almost to the point where his ring will eventually just break and won't let it happen. Now, to me, this is kind of interesting because it plays with this mechanic of, okay, well, say if you want to be a nice demon, and you go and you go and you go and you and eventually you get to the point where you're like super you don't have a single drop of bad aura, bad moral intention in you, to where eventually you'll just boil over and your demon will project this insane radius, whatever, as well as it will make you look more demonic whilst you are low on this fuel. So this kind of plays within this circle, whereas, okay, well, eventually your monster is going to basically facilitate eating. So if you're a demon, you'll look more demonous, as well as people around you will become more chaotic, beating people viciously, which will allow you basically to feed and take as much as you can. So it's like kind of like a genetic firewall to get you back to 1 if you ever go to 10. And same thing with Grim. If you keep hungering yourself and you don't feed yourself enough, eventually you'll just go berserk and eat until you're full, but you might cause carnage and you don't have any control about what you're doing. It's like an instinct. That's what it is. It's like an instinctual barrier. So that's kind of like what's going on with our characters in terms of the way they're feeding, and this is what the guy is explaining to them to some extent. And Crowley kind of starts thinking about this, but all the while, let's say that when Crowley hears this, he kind of like winces a little bit and like looks at Grim almost as like, I don't know what to do, and Grim is completely doesn't even look at him, like he doesn't even consider it, like it's not even something where he's like, oh my god. He's just like, all right, like this is both of what we are now, like let's move forward kind of thing. But Crowley's kind of like, fuck, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be this. But the lack of judgment helps him move forward. Okay. So they've had their food. They've both like livened up. And let's say that for that split second moment when Grim bites into that moon bar, his aura leaks out just a little bit because his wolf was like, and that creates this kind of feeling around everyone else of like this feeling of a monster gaining strength again, feeling like empowered, which is scary, but also because Grim's personality right now is very happy and not like on the attack, so it projects an aura of not run, I'm gonna eat you, but instead food. So this basically, when this happens, again, if I was doing a movie or if I was writing in a book, I would describe that as soon as they start eating, a bunch of people that were in stores, that were in cars, that were hiding behind trash cans and signs peek up, like almost like, oh, they're doing it. Like these crazy people are doing it. So as they're inquiring about the shopkeepers, asking, well, how much would you need for this? What do you offer? And then the shopkeeper is delighted by someone who actually wants to pay and not like, just getting a free pass. And he keeps egging you on to be like, well, you just need to go into the catacomb. They're located here. And even if you just fight the first couple people at the gate and then run, if you get things get a little dicey, then that's enough for me to get you like a cool sword, some armor maybe. What do you want? Like again, he loves the idea that he's not having to give away things for free. He has someone who could have a potential worthy customer, which by the way is something we're going to mess with, and I might as well tell you now. That's something that both Crowley and Grim basically form a fantastic name for themselves amongst the shopkeepers all around the world, because each shopkeeper keeps like a database of good customers, and these are one of the first crazy people that went to the dungeon and gave you money and actually started being a good customer, so they're going to keep track of that and make note of that. So this guy, just by the pure prospect of someone inquiring about how he's going to get paid, basically, is awesome, and he kind of remembers you, and again, in the future, we're going to do a time skip of 2 weeks, and that 2 weeks, they're grinding, they're making the storekeepers a lot of money, that kind of thing. Regardless, one of the things that also happens in this moment, this is kind of like a cute moment that I want to interject, again, to kind of backtrack. There was this girl, when they approached the shopkeeper, hiding behind some trash cans, like almost like, I want to go and see something because I'm getting pulled towards this thing, but I'm also terrified. It's this scared little girl, right? So him and Crowley kind of walk past her. Grim maybe makes like a little wave motion as showing that he's kind and like not like, you're okay, we're just walking by, and then they go and talk to them. And the little girl is also with everybody else at this point, peeking over, looking. So whilst Grim and Crowley are communicating about getting some supplies and whatnot, and what it would cost to do that, this little girl walks up behind Grim and tugs on his, I think he's wearing like a sweater that's like a little bit longer, like lengthwise, so it goes a little bit past maybe his bum a little bit. Regardless, it's like this hood. By the way, Grim is wearing the hood, Crowley's wearing his glasses that both conceal his monster nature, just to give some context of what they may look like. Regardless, this little girl walks up behind him and tugs on Grimm's sweater. Grimm turns around and she kind of staggers back like afraid. And I'm not going into the dialogue, but essentially this moment is where this very, very frightened little girl is terrified and doesn't know what to do, but she knows that she needs to go here and that you fed and you felt great. And this was a I kind of wanted to do a veto thing where again the demigod kind of realizes his mess up. I did mention that like this is like a passive rule in the world, but if you were using if you dressed up on Halloween and you loved your monster, like you just were overjoyed with that, you didn't become the most monstrous equivalent of it. So for instance, if you were a little girl who was like, I want to dress up as like a cool witch, you wouldn't get punished and become like a disgusting looking witch because of that, because you were glorifying the witch. Now if you were dressed up as like a little girl who was like, I want to be a vampire and the most bloodthirsty whatever of it, so you put a bunch of blood on your face and you did all this crazy stuff and you're like, you are shittily enough making fun of that creature, so of course you are still affected. But if you were a person who was like a little girl who well, again, none of it is personality based, but this little girl is hungry, basically. What I'm getting at is this little girl who tugged on Grimm's thing is thirsty. She is one of the people who were unfortunately labeled, had a prefix, which is bloodthirsty vampire and all that stuff. So yes, as this little girl approaches Grimm and points at the shopkeeper and says, could I have some too, or whatever. And as she points at the shopkeeper, she kind of takes a couple steps forward and she's right beside Grimm. So at this point, Grimm puts his hand on her back and pushes her forward, kind of like a little nudge, like, you got this, go ahead. And he probably even says stuff like that, like, come on, you got this, go ahead. And the shopkeeper lights up and is like, hi little miss, what can I do for you? And the little girl speaks up and says, no matter what I do, no matter how much I eat, I'm still starving, and I'm feeling more and more not like myself. And then the big Santa-like thing says, well, I got the thing for you. And then passes her this little tiny, or not tiny, let's say it's a pretty, yeah, sure, let's say that. It's this little tiny vial of blood. So she pops it open, she drinks and says, it's yummy. And the shopkeeper leans over, sniffs again, and he's like, oh, wow, you're a hungry one. And then takes this giant bottle of blood that's like a wine bottle and passes it to her. And he tells her to finish that by the end of the day, and she should be good for a couple days. The little girl walks off with this giant wine bottle, all jolly, back to her apartment and place. And let's say nothing terrible happened with her parents or nothing terrible like that. Yeah, because again, it takes a while, let's just say, to let you go, to have you completely come undone. And again, with the demigod, he probably wanted to hold back chaos to some extent, especially with trying to repair things. Anyways, so at this point, after Grimm kind of like convince this little girl, like, you got this, go ahead, do it, like, this person's not a bad guy, seems great, all that good stuff. So then everyone else starts to kind of like walk forward and slowly take steps towards the shop, whilst Grimm and Crowley both get in their car, and everyone kind of takes note of these just weirdos, because they do look very iconic and you won't forget them. But basically there's this dude with a hood, with this dark ass hood, who projects an aura of like kindness and comforting and all that stuff. And then there's this dude who's just very weird. He's in like classic suit, wearing these weirdo glasses, Crowley and all that stuff. Regardless, both of them kind of back up as everyone kind of gets braver and starts to bleed in, and then the shopkeeper kind of gives his pitch and starts selling it to everybody and telling them all about their stuff and just all this lovely stuff. Now, all over the world this is happening, where people finally get courage and go talk to the shopkeeper and they sate their urge. But again, the shopkeeper keeps pounding that, hey, this is going to go away in a little bit, so you have to go down there or figure something out. So then I think at this point, all nations, all parts of the world basically come together to try to find out what they're gonna do. And sure, let's say that there were in some places of the world they tried to rob the shopkeepers to fucking no avail. Like they just didn't get close because they're otherworldly, right? And sure, let's say that sometimes the shopkeeper will just move. Like if they keep trying to steal from them and like break them down, they'll just teleport away to another country that's not as hostile. And then maybe when that country eventually realizes, fuck, we need them, they'll come back with free of charge, just kind of businessmen, right? Regardless, every country kind of figures out, okay, well, we need to send people into this valley. So if anyone wants to be an adventurer, you can go into these caverns, and if you give us a tax of it, then we'll pay you human dollars just for bring money out of the dungeon, basically, into our economy and all that stuff. So we'll give you human dollars if you pull some money out of the dungeon, even just a little bit, to circulate so that people who need their things will basically be able to survive, like their basic human needs met. So a lot of the country, let's say, does that. So if you are going to be a person who's splodunking in the dungeons, you're going to be getting taken care of in the real world to some extent as well. But the currency in the dungeon is very valued, let's just say that. But regardless, getting back to the story, him and Crowley both get into the car. They both sit down, and Crowley just starts driving. And at this point, they're just kind of having a chat. They're kind of like, well, okay, what do we do? Like, they're both very kind of like, and sure, let's say Crowley speaks up and says, well, we should go over what we know, I guess. Like, not what we feel necessarily just yet, what we know, to stay kind of anchored. And then Grimm says, okay, well, we know we need this currency now. We need it 100%. And I think a lot of people need it. And so then he says, okay, well, the only way to get that currency is to go into the dungeon. And then they keep going through these step by step, basically coming to the deduction of, okay, we need to go to the dungeon. We have experience in fighting some of the things. And also, we don't know where we compare to other people either. So let's go into the dungeon, even just dip our foot in just to see what it is and what it's like. And then Crowley speaks up and says, also, I want to see what we are compared to others. Because that's something that Crowley's terrified of. Is like, okay, well, what if there's an ogre person who dressed up as like an ogre and actually became that and can crush us easily, right? And that's not like a person that, like an ogre in the dungeon. Oh, that could exist, but more like an ogre in the real world who became an ogre and they're tough like that. So he wants to. Crowley's there because he wants to see how he measures up to others. And Grimm's there because he knows that they need this resource, and just to see what that would be, what life in that sense could be of like going into the dungeon. So alas, ladies and gentlemen, I think that's where we'll end it. The only reason why I say that's where we'll end it is I don't think I can wrap up the dungeon sequence in an hour. So yeah, or sorry, in 10 minutes. I mean, honestly, forgive me for like 10 minutes or 20 minutes maybe of this video was me recapping and trying to do my best to explain what happened with the whole demigod, like in the reasons why going through Act 1, and now this is Act 2. Now we're not quite all like at the point where Act 2 happens. I want there to be some time jump, like again 2 weeks time jump for there to be this thing, but we have not gotten there yet. We're pretty close. Again, we're very close. I think maybe one more part and we'll be able to get there. I feel like I should probably do that. Yeah, I kind of like the idea a little bit more. I think I'll section things to explaining the ideas I have and why I want to have them. And then explaining how our characters interact with those ideas. Because I think this time I was kind of bouncing between like explaining what our characters do and then also building the world, which I feel like just kind of can get a little bit messy and complicated. So yeah, in the future I would like to do that, to invest, like explain the ideas that I have and then and how our characters can kind of mess around with them. Like in this thing, I really wanted to mess around with the idea of vendors and how the world, and a greater showcase of how people are handling the changes in the world, even in this split second moment where everything happened like 4 hours ago, but everyone's drawn to these shops. But also to show that this is not like horrifying. Like these vendors are supposed to be expert shop sellers and like, you know, people like that who can sell you on stuff, make you feel warm and welcome and all these things. So yes, ladies and gentlemen, that is episode whatever of the Impossible World podcast. Also, I never assigned this one a chapter name or anything like that. We went into it very free-flowed because again, I didn't want to cover anything super important. It was just me kind of wanting to introduce these ideas. Also, I gotta stop stuttering. But like the story, like the chapter, if this was a book and a chapter name, maybe the start of something more? ? Chapter 9 or whatever it is, 10. Start of something more. But yes, the next part is going to be Into the Depths We Go, All the Way Home? Maybe? The other half, Into the Depths We Go, All the Way Home. Maybe. I don't know. Coming up with names that summarize what might happen next part is a nightmare. So, regardless, in the next part, guys, we're going to experience what the hell the dungeons are all about, or at least like the couple levels to them, as well as Grimm and Crowley finding something that man, this is the jumping off point that I was talking about, which I think is so fun, so fun to mess around with in your head. But we'll get into that in the next part, hopefully, if we'll have enough time. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your day. Subscribe button right over there, as well as 2 videos further that way. I appreciate you once again. Also, if you like this video or shared it with anybody, I see you even more.